I'm the Book Baron. Welcome in, everybody. If you're new here, my name is Baron, and if you're old here, guess you already knew that. Today, I wanted to do a video I haven't actually done in a really long time. I think it's been almost a year, maybe even more than that, but I love recommending books based off of a book you already know and love. You already know the energy, the vibe, the feeling you want to go after, and especially as a mood reader, a lot of times that's what I'm looking for. You're looking for that book that's going to match your freak. I think I have about like 6 or 7 matchings, but I'm going to be honest, I cannot stop adding to this list, so there's probably more that I'll think of later. Let's just get into the books, shall we? So I'm going to start with some more like sci-fi-ish books here. The first one that I have for you is Hold by Claire Kent. So this is set in a world where all crimes are punished the same, minor infractions result in life sentences, you end up getting sent to prison planets where you're going to live out the rest of your days. Our heroine in this book is one such unlucky individual. She ends up being sentenced for a pretty minor crime that really came down to some paperwork. When she's sentenced to this prison planet, a guard takes pity on her and says, hey, your best game plan, because it's really rough in there, is find the biggest and baddest, someone that can protect and provide for you, give him the goods. So he'll give you the goods, I guess, protection, food, resources, because it's really rough in there. She ends up eyeing up a broody loner. We've got some survival, some prison planet, some exchanging of goods for other goods. If you like that energy, if you like that feeling, try The Guardian by Emmy Chandler. So these premises are so similar. I'm gonna try and be really clear about the differences. In this book, our heroine, similarly, newly convicted, getting sent to a prison planet. This prison planet's a little bit different. There's sections, so there's like territories or zones that the landmass is divided up into, and you are dropped in one of the zones. So the zone that Audra ends up getting set up in has 2 different encampments. One is for males and one is for females. They have a kind of tentative agreement that anytime they get a new batch of female prisoners, the female encampment will bring over a select few to be distributed among the men, shall we say? In exchange, the men will not attack the women's settlement. So our heroine is one such unlucky individual, and she is told the deal is quite simple. Whoever you pick in this settlement will be who you have to give up the goods to. In exchange, they should be providing you with food, shelter, and safety. However, because this is a little bit more of a formal program, shall we say, you can be stolen, capture the flag style, from the guy that you pick. So you got to pick well. So obviously you can see that there's a lot of similarities here. I think the biggest differences is that Hold is a little bit more contained because it's happening within the cell block within a proper prison system, versus Guardian is a little bit more like wilderness based. There's so much larger territories, there's hunting, it's a little bit more like outdoorsy survivalist at times, and there's a lot more movement and freedom as a result. This is also a proper novel length versus Hold, I think kind of borders somewhere between novella and novelette length. That's our first pairing. Next up, if you like Choosing Theo by Victoria Aveline, this is about Jade, who is kind of just living a very simple life, a quiet life, until she is abruptly abducted by aliens and taken to this alien planet. She ends up escaping from her original captors. She has to kind of go through the wilderness and try and find some form of civilization. Now, she ends up running into much, much friendlier aliens, thankfully, and they agree to help her, sort of. She can't really go back to Earth, so they come up with an alternative solution where she can stay on the planet. She must stay on their planet for 1 year because she doesn't know the culture, but she also needs to take a husband, which is a very common practice here. It's almost kind of similar to dating, but eventually she ends up kind of acquiescing, trying to play along just enough that she can figure out a way to get back to Earth. In the process, she ends up selecting a husband named Theo, and he's kind of a loner who tends to prefer solitude and has never been selected before, but there's some reproduction issues. Anyone that's selected is on some level at least a little stoked. If you like that kind of abduction, aliens, we've got a culture to learn that we're being thrust into, a little bit of being forced together with an alien man, then I highly recommend that you try The Lasaran by Diane Duvall. This is about Talon, who is our hero, and he's going to Earth because that's where his sister disappeared because she was on a diplomatic mission. They too are having some issues with reproduction among their alien species. He ends up finding out his sister is being held prisoner, goes after her, he ends up getting captured too. Doesn't go so well. Bad rescue mission. This is actually how he meets our heroine. So our heroine, when we end up meeting up with her, she is kind of alone in the world. She doesn't really have anybody. A lot of her family has passed and she's just kind of scraping by. And one of the things that she does to pay for college and kind of keep her head above water is to participate in paid studies. She ends up finding kind of a weird one about psychics, and it's backed by the government, oddly. She ends up getting in even though she knows she's not a psychic. She keeps kind of playing along because she wants the money. Through this process that she ends up captured and experimented on. Her and Talon, now that they've ended up in these circumstances, end up having to team up to escape. But there's a little bit of a hitch in the road, a little bit of a bump, if you know what I'm saying. Maybe not. We've got reproduction issues. There's a lot of similarities here, right? We've got the abduction, an action-packed beginning, and a little bit of like being forced together because of the circumstances. And again, the alien races are really having some reproduction issues. I think the Lasaran really differs in that we're on Earth for this one, so it's a little bit of a reversal. Instead of the human going to the alien planet, the aliens are coming to the human planet. They're coming to Earth. The next ones are all going to be dark romances, and the first set that I have for you is actually 2 series that I think are quite similar in their feeling, in their energy. So I'm going to talk about these in a little bit broader strokes. I'm not necessarily going to talk about the specifics of the books because those parts don't align, but the overall, the energy is very similar between these two. If you like Devil's Night by Penelope Douglas, which is about a group of 4 high school boys who on Devil's Night, their senior year, end up wreaking wild havoc on the town, so much so that they end up getting arrested and they need to figure out why. Who caused them to get arrested? Because before this, they've been the rich boys, they've been untouchable, they've been the bad boys, but they've never had things escalate this far. Now that they've spent years in prison, they want to get revenge. And the books largely follow a dual timeline between when they were in high school and also a now time frame years later after they're out of prison, following them falling in love with someone typically from the town that they're from. Each book is a different couple within the group. If you like that kind of like rich boys running amok, getting some revenge, but also falling in love, I recommend that you try the Hollow Boy series by Monty J. Once again, we have a group of 4 boys, rich boys, bad boys in their small town. They're not quite as respected, but they are definitely feared. While they are in high school, a friend / one of their girlfriends ends up murdered. Years later, when they're in college, it's them falling in love, but also trying to uncover the plot and what happened and why they lost their friend so brutally. I think Devil's Night tends to move around a little bit more, only because a lot of the setting in the current timeline takes place in the city, whereas Hollow Boys is a little bit more atmospheric because it focuses primarily on this really small town, and it's on the Oregon coast, so it kind of is just a little bit moodier, mistier. I feel like the dramatics are dialed up a little bit more in this book as well. Our next pairing that I have for you, if you like Ecstasy by KV Rose, which is about 3 folks that are attending university and they're a little bit disenchanted with their lives. They're a little bit sick of them. We've got Zara, who has a substance abuse problem, Eli, who is a star athlete, but he's also got some secrets, and we also have Alex, who's another star athlete, but he's mostly known for just being a massive asshole. So he's really charming. Eli is Alex's roommate, and they end up throwing a party where Zara is in attendance. Now, Alex and Zara have a little bit of a history. They were dating, but she's kind of pulled some crappy stuff. There's a lot of drama, there's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of destruction, and it's their 3 worlds absolutely colliding in the most horrific way. So if you like this kind of whirlwind blend of toxic, dramatic, messy relationships, mental health, addiction, sort of like I can't stay away from you, if I can't have you, no one can energy, then I highly recommend that you try Shattered Hearts by Shea Ruby. In this book, Zane and Hallie have sort of a chance encounter on their college campus, and Zane becomes absolutely infatuated from the very first minute. What he doesn't know, though, is Hallie's actually on a very intense downward spiral. She's had some trauma that she's hasn't really dealt with. So she's covering it up with a mix of prescription pills and alcohol. And while it seems like Zane might be a life raft in her storm, someone to help kind of pull her out, it turns out Zane is not as stable as he seems. He's looking less and less like her savior and more like an anchor, because he's spiraling out even worse. And their relationship will be absolutely catastrophic in its fallout. You can see how these sound very similar. Ecstasy feels a little bit more dark in some of the actions that the characters take. It feels like it's darker, more twisted, pushing boundaries in that way. I think Shattered Hearts feels a little bit more like raw and emotional, and it focuses a little bit more just on this couple versus a love triangle situation. This book really just feels emotionally like you're drowning, versus Ecstasy has a little bit more of a messy party girl, dramatic feel to it. And also there is a love triangle at some point, because this is actually part of a series and it follows the same characters throughout, a little bit different than the Ecstasy series. So my next pairing for you has to do with a book I very recently read, and one of my all-time, actually this might be, is this my favorite book that I've ever read? I think it's safe to say that. I'm more than a year out from reading this. If you like Take Me With You by Nina G. Jones, which is about Vesper, she's not very happy with life. She's always sort of made the correct quote-unquote decisions. She's always done the right thing. She takes care of her brother. She has the right type of boyfriend, but she's just not happy with life. She's not making decisions she wants. And she sort of dreams of her hand being forced, of someone taking her away from all of this. And she starts to feel like she has eyes on her. Turns out there are eyes on her. There is a like Golden State Killer type of guy that has been stalking her. Eventually one night he ends up breaking in, and Vesper, in order to protect the other people in the home, says, "Take me with you." And this sets off a whole set of other events. So if you like that, like captor captive, you're sitting in the heroine's head. It's a lot of her trying to make these decisions and choices about how does she survive in these circumstances. There's also this like heavy emphasis on Stockholm syndrome and how it's taking root and how that's altering their decision making. If you like all of that, if you like some poignant lines, I highly recommend you check out Comfort Food by Kitty Thomas. Now, technically, this book came before Take Me With You and is generally more popular. However, it's much older, and I think just based on conversations with people, it's been forgotten about a little bit, so I want to bring it back up. So Comfort Food is about Emily. When we meet her at the beginning of this like more novella-length book, she has just been taken captive, and she is being conditioned in a slightly different way. There's absolutely no violence being used. The main mechanism of control is sensory deprivation, and in particular, limiting human contact. It's starting to mess with her mind. There's no mental stimulation. She feels like she's going crazy. She's basically touch starved. She finds herself starting to crave his presence, his touch. I think there's some very key differences. Take Me With You has a little bit more complexity just because it is longer. This is a proper novel length. It's also set in, I think it's the 70s, if I remember correctly. So that's a key difference. And although neither of the heroes really speak, in Take Me With You, you do get more of his perspective and you get a little bit of a dual timeline. There's a little bit more going on kind of plot-wise, versus with Comfort Food, it's a novella length, so it's a lot shorter. It's got a lot of those same principles where we're like in the heroine's perspective. We get a little bit of insight into what's going on with him, but not a ton. It's really more focused on the heroine and what's happening with her, and a little bit less like romantic it feeling because of that, because there's less of an established relationship. Hopefully that kind of makes some amount of sense. Next up, I have The Liver by Pam Godwin. This is about a man that is trafficked. So he is a star football player, and he ends up being identified by someone in a trafficking ring as an ideal candidate for an order that they need to fulfill. Liv more or less lures him in and then tries to break him down in order to get him to perform certain activities. Problem is, he's not breaking. In fact, he can actually see past the circumstances, the mask that she's wearing in order to try and break him down, and sees that maybe there's more going on there and maybe he needs to save her. There's some organized crime elements, there's captives meeting. She's a little bit older, been in captivity longer. He sees through the facade. They need to escape. If you like all those, I highly recommend you try Counts of 8 by Bryn Ford. I know I've talked about this to death on my channel, but I cannot express how much I love this series, which is about Anya, who is serving the four families, which is an alliance of 4 organized crime families. They have these meetings every quarter, and for those meetings, they need to provide a source of entertainment. So Anya dances ballet, and they bring in different partners for her, but they just never quite live up to Anya's talent or anyone's expectations. So, they get gone. Honestly, at this point, Anya's kind of given up hope of ever escaping. She's been in captivity for quite a long time. That is until they bring her Ezra. This is her new dance partner. She is once again tasked with breaking this man in and getting him up to speed for an upcoming performance. Once again, the problem is Ezra's not breaking. He's actually becoming protective of her because he can see what's going on and how she's been manipulated. Unfortunately, forming bonds in this house is probably one of the most dangerous things that you can do. So I think with Counts of 8, because it's a series, the plot looms a lot larger. There's a lot more complexity to the organized crime aspect of it. And it focuses a lot more on their cooperation because they need to be able to perform this dance together. Versus Deliver, it has a little bit more of an interconnected feel because you have focus on different couples throughout the series. There is still that organized crime element, but it sits more in the background for quite a while in the series and takes a little bit more to unfold. Right. And finally, I have for you Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. So this is about Dean and Cora, and Dean is engaged to Cora's older sister. These two have always had a very antagonistic relationship. And one night after everyone has been out to the bars, Cora ends up staying a little bit longer than everybody else. In the process, loses her purse and can't get a ride home. So she tries calling everyone in her phone book. She's not getting anyone. And the only person that ends up picking up is Dean, and he begrudgingly agrees to come pick her up. They end up having a pretty uncomfortable encounter with someone in the parking lot as they take off for home, and very shortly after, they end up getting pulled over by who they think is a cop. Is actually a serial unaliver who has plans to take them hostage, and they are forced to do some very horrible things while in captivity. The majority of the book is not focused on their time in captivity, but rather on the messy fallout. They've experienced this big traumatic event together. They're very attached to one another. No one else understands, but it's forbidden because one of them is very clearly attached to someone else, even though they really lean on each other in order to heal. So if you like a lot of that energy, you like that big traumatic event, you like that healing, you like that forbidden element, you like that dark, messy, imperfect healing, they're forced to do unspeakable things together. If you like all of that, try Irreparable Damage by Sam Mariano. This one is about Willow, and she is the illegitimate daughter of a mafia crime boss. But she really leads a very quiet life in the suburbs with her moms and brother, and she's really just focused on what does she want to do after high school. Her dad's world unfortunately ends up intruding in on hers, and around her 18th birthday, she is taken by traffickers. This is how she ends up coming in contact with a PI by the name of Ethan Wilde. He has been tasked with infiltrating this trafficking ring and rescuing a missing girl. In order to prove himself, to prove that he's one of them, he has to do something really heinous, really horrible to prove that he's on their level. The mission that he is on depends on his ability to do this. Unfortunately, this causes irreparable damage to our heroine, and he feels horrifically responsible and wants to help her heal because this decision has really haunted him, made him question whether he's a good person or not. I think one of the biggest differences with these two books, the first being Irreparable Damage is in third person, so it has a slightly different feel because of that. They also don't know each other beforehand. beforehand, so they don't have a history. There's no like dual timeline of any kind. And the length of time where the traumatic events are taking place are much shorter. So a lot of it really is focused on them being messy together and trying to heal from what happened. Just to throw you a little bit of a curveball, there's another book that I think is quite similar, but this is meant more for if you're looking for something a little bit lighter. So I would recommend you try Unbreakable by Emma Scott. This is about Alex, who is our heroine. She is a lawyer kind of following in her father's footsteps. She's on a very big case right now. She ends up going to the bank while the jury is out deliberating. And during this time, everyone in the bank ends up being taken hostage. She sort of had chit-chatted a little bit with someone in line, and that man's name is Corey, and he couldn't be more of her opposite if he tried. He's a construction worker, he's a single dad, he's struggling to make ends meet. But during this bank robbery, they have several days where they really get to contemplate life and all of the things that they really want out of it. They realize deep down that they really have a lot in common. They have this very profound connection. And they also think that they could die at any moment. And everyone is released when they all get out. They realize that they have been altered in ways that they never anticipated and start reevaluating how they're leading their current lives and also lean on each other a lot for support because no one else understands what they just went through. Again, this one, they don't know each other very well or at all beforehand. It's a lot less dark. It's a lot less like dark, messy emotions and feels like a lot more like positive strides towards healing. So it has a lot lighter feel in that regard. If you like the idea of that kind of like big traumatic event, something scary bonds them, and then they're kind of like moving on and follows that similar pattern to still beating, but maybe you don't want something as dark, I would recommend giving that one a try. But if you like the dark, messy, irreparable damage, for sure. Those are all the book pairings that I have for you. And honestly, even as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of more that I could potentially pair up. But I would love to hear from you. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? If you've read both of them, what do you think of my pairing? Did I do good? And if you have any similar books that you've read, I always feel like a mad genius when that happens. Let me know which books you've read that you feel like are really similar. Let's get some more of these types of recommendations. I love them. They're so fun. With all of that, thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want more content from me. And I hope I see you on my next video. Bye-bye.